Arthur Sterling did not merely run a company. He ruled an empire. To him, the world was a series of calculations where he was the only variable. On this night, the air inside Sterling Tech HQ was thick with a heavy chill. The 50 floors of glass and steel were vibrating with power. Arthur stood in the war room, his suit as sharp as his gaze, staring at the holographic display that would soon solidify his legacy. This wasn't just business. The merger with Titan Industries would create a monopoly, requiring only one final signature through the Aegis system. The room's silence was broken only by the rhythmic tapping of the CTO's keyboard. Then, the unthinkable happened. Just as Arthur's fingers hovered over the biometric scanner, the glowing blue interface of the Aegis system turned a violent purple before plunging into total darkness. Every terminal in the building went black in a single heartbeat. The signature window was closing fast. A pulsing red cursor blinked in the upper left corner of the main display, mocking the elite minds gathered there. This was the black screen error, a catastrophic collapse that was as instantaneous as it was absolute. Panic erupted among the executives. The CTO, a man who prided himself on knowing every line of Aegis code, felt the color drain from his face. This was a total system lockout. Every minute of downtime cost millions. Worse, the merger contract contained a stability clause. If the system failed during this signing window, the deal was legally forfeited. He feared the shame more than the bankruptcy. His reputation was on the line. The top-tier developers fell into a frantic retreat. They threw every expensive diagnostic tool at the black screen, but the system remained unresponsive to their touch. Amidst this chaos, the invisible inhabitants of the building continued their work. Maria, the janitor who had cleaned these floors for a decade, was quietly wiping the glass walls of the war room. To Arthur and his team, she was no more significant than the office furniture. She moved with silent grace, observing the sweat beading on the brows of the powerful men inside. Just outside the glass doors sat her teenage son, Leo. He wore a faded hoodie and held a battered second-hand laptop covered in stickers of logic gates. He was only there because the late-night buses had stopped running, waiting for his mother to finish her shift. Leo's eyes were fixed on the mainframe's terminal. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Sensing something the experts had missed, Leo approached the glass door and tapped lightly. Arthur, his temper at a breaking point, whirled around. He was visibly shaken. Seeing the boy, a flash of elitist disgust crossed his face. He stormed to the door, screaming at Leo to get away from the equipment. He turned his venom toward Maria, insulting her for bringing a distraction into a billion-dollar crisis, labeling them both as eyesores in his temple of technology. Maria stepped forward to pull her son away, her head bowed in humility. But Leo didn't move. He looked past the CEO's rage directly at the CTO, who was still desperately typing. In a voice that cut through the tension, Leo muttered that they were looking at the wrong layer. He mentioned that the system wasn't crashing. It was being suppressed by a ghost protocol hidden deep within the legacy kernel. The CTO froze, his hands over the keys. It was a term used only in the most obscure, forgotten technical manuals. The room went silent as the expert looked at the boy in the hoodie. Realizing the distraction, understood the machine better than anyone. The silence that followed Leo's mention of the ghost protocol was heavy, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic beep of an alarm echoing through the war room. The main monitor shifted from the void of the black screen to a terrifying blood-red interface. A countdown appeared in the center of the display, ticking backward from 30 minutes. The Aegis system had entered its final failsafe. A self-destruct sequence designed to wipe every byte of proprietary data to prevent a perceived breach. To Arthur Sterling, those red numbers felt like a firing squad. His legacy was being incinerated. For the first time, the iron-willed CEO looked truly broken. The sharp edges of his composure softened into a mask of sheer, helpless vulnerability. He looked at his CTO, then at the rows of developers, seeing only a reflection of incompetence and fear. He had built this fortress of technology on the backs of the elite, yet they were standing by like spectators at a funeral. His arrogance had created a blind spot so wide it had swallowed his entire future. He had ignored the subtle warnings, believing his vision was infallible. Arthur turned his gaze toward the door, his eyes landing on Maria. He expected to see fear, but instead, he found a quiet, immovable dignity. Maria stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Leo's shoulder, positioning herself between the powerful man and her son. She didn't raise her voice, but her words carried more weight than any boardroom decree. She looked Arthur in the eye and told him that while he had been looking at the stars, he had been throwing the keys to his kingdom into the trash. She revealed a secret years in the making. Every night, while Arthur signed billion-dollar deals, Maria had been salvaging discarded technical manuals and rejected coding drafts he had thrown away. She had carried them home in her cleaning cart, and Leo had spent his nights under a dim lamp, memorizing the architecture of a system that the world believed was impenetrable. But the boy hadn't learned from prestigious universities. He had learned from the very garbage Arthur deemed beneath his notice. Desperation is a powerful humbler. Arthur looked at the ticking clock, 24 minutes left, and then at the boy in the faded hoodie. With a sneer that couldn't quite hide his terror, he stepped aside and gestured toward the server room. He told Leo to move, mocking the boy's scuffed sneakers and the smell of cheap detergent from his mother's supply closet. He made it clear that this was an act of madness, a last-gasp effort before the end. Even in his moment of greatest need, Arthur could not let go of the class-based venom that defined his world. Leo didn't respond to the insults. He walked into the sterile atmosphere of the server room, his battered laptop looking like a relic against the glowing mainframe. The contrast was stark. The elite programmers in their $5,000 suits stood huddled in the background, while the boy in the hoodie took the seat of power. He plugged a frayed cable into the master port, his fingers moving across the keys with a fluid, hypnotic speed that silenced the room. As he worked, Leo began to speak, his voice calm. He explained that the Aegis system was a house of cards, built with shortcuts that prioritized speed over security. The elite team had built a monument to their own vanity, leaving back doors open that a child could find. But as Leo dove deeper into the encrypted layers, his brow furrowed. The tension reached a fever pitch as Leo's screen flashed internal logs. This wasn't an accidental crash. He found a pre-programmed sabotage script. The illogic bomb hidden deep within the executive board's own access codes. Someone on the inside had set this trap months ago. Just as Leo reached for the override command to stop the self-destruct, the mainframe let out a high-pitched whine. A massive prompt appeared. Access denied. Identity not recognized. The countdown, which had been at 15 minutes, suddenly skipped forward, the numbers blurring as they raced towards zero. The system had sensed the intrusion, and the saboteur's final trap was closing. The red numbers on the monitor blurred into a digital frenzy, the countdown dropping from minutes to seconds in a heartbeat. Panic surged through the war room like an electric shock, sending the board members into a desperate, undignified scramble for the exits. But Leo remained still, his silhouette framed by the glowing monitors. His eyes didn't flicker toward the ticking clock. Instead, they were locked onto a sequence of logic that most modern engineers would have laughed at. He remembered a specific chapter in an old coffee-stained manual from the late 90s. A foundational document Arthur Sterling had tossed into a recycling bin years ago because he deemed it obsolete. That manual contained the skeleton of Sterling Tech's original kernel. Leo knew that while the Aegis system had been updated 1,000 times, its core still rested on that forgotten, ancient architecture. He bypassed the high-level security prompts entirely, diving deep into the discarded garbage of the system's basement. His fingers danced across the keyboard with a rhythmic tapping that was the only sound in the now silent room. He wasn't trying to break the lock, while he was walking through a door that everyone else had forgotten was even there. With a final, decisive strike on the enter key, the chaos ceased. The high-pitched whine of the servers dropped to a low, healthy hum. The aggressive red glow of the monitors flickered once, then transitioned into a serene, steady blue. The word "restored" appeared in simple, white letters. For a long moment, nobody breathed. The catastrophic wipe had been halted with less than 5 seconds to spare. Arthur Sterling leaned against a glass wall, his legs barely holding him up, watching as the proprietary data of his life's work reassembled itself before his eyes. The elite programmers stood frozen, their mouths agape at the boy who had just done the impossible. But Leo wasn't finished. The crash wasn't a flaw, the boy said, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness. He explained that it was a signature. He tapped a few more keys, and the main display split into two. On the left, the merger agreement sat ready for its digital signature. On the right, a string of encrypted logs unraveled, tracing the sabotage back to an authorized internal terminal. The digital fingerprint was undeniable. It pointed directly to the CTO, who was already inching toward the door, his face pale and eyes darting with the panic of a trapped animal. The man had planned to trigger the collapse, tank the stock, and collect a massive payout from a rival firm. Arthur looked at the screen, then at his trusted executive, his face hardening into a mask of cold, calculated fury. Security was already at the door. The CTO was escorted out in a silence so profound it felt heavy. Turning back to the monitors, Arthur initiated the digital signature. The deal was done. The Empire was safe. The room began to buzz with the voices of the recovered elite, but Arthur ignored them all. He walked slowly toward the server room, his expensive shoes clicking on the floor. He had once thought Maria was only fit to clean. He looked at Leo, then at Maria, who stood with her chin held high, her hand still resting on her son's shoulder. The CEO's arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind a man who finally saw the world as it actually was. He realized that the most brilliant mind in the building had been sitting in the hallway in a faded hoodie, and the most loyal soul had been the one he treated as invisible. Arthur cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. He apologized, not just for the insults of the night, but for the years of blindness. He immediately offered Leo a full scholarship to any university and a lead security consultant role with a salary that would change their lives. Leo looked at his mother and smiled. He told Arthur he would accept, but only if Maria never had to pick up a mop again. Instead, she was to be given a seat on the company's community board to represent the people Arthur had long ignored. Arthur nodded without hesitation. As the sun rose, casting a golden light through the glass walls, Maria and Leo walked out of the building. They were no longer shadows. They were the pillars of the company's future. Arthur watched them from the window, finally understanding that true genius and dignity are often found in the places we refuse to look. Or the people he had once discarded were the only ones who had known how to save him.